Ever feel like you're on this hamster wheel of almost there? Like if you could just tweak this or perfect that, then you'd finally feel worthy.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like this never-ending chase.
Right. Today we're diving into Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection, and I mean really digging deep. Not just skimming the surface, but figuring out how to actually live this wholehearted life she talks about.
And you know what's really cool about Brown is she doesn't just talk the talk. She's spent years researching shame, vulnerability, all that messy stuff that makes us human, right? Like, she's got the receipts to back it up.
Okay, so no fluffy self-help here. Got it. But for our listener who's maybe already familiar with her work, we're going beyond the basics in this deep dive. Like, how do we actually put these powerful concepts into practice?
Totally. Because that feeling of not enough, it can be a creativity killer, a joy stealer. It'll hold you back for sure. Brown's work gives us some serious tools to combat that.
So let's unpack this whole idea of wholehearted living. It's become kind of a buzz phrase, but what does it actually look like, in real life?
Yeah. Well, Brown defines it as engaging with the world from a place of inherent worthiness. And that's a big one, right? Not because you've ticked off some imaginary checklist, but simply because you exist. You, just as you are enough.
Wow, that's huge. I think for a lot of us, that's a radical concept, right? We're so used to this idea of earning our worth, like constantly striving for this elusive state of perfection.
And that's where her research on shame comes in. She found that shame thrives in the darkness, When we keep it hidden, buried under all that fear and self-judgment, it tells us we're flawed, unworthy, and it keeps us from those genuine connections we all crave.
Because we're terrified of someone seeing those flaws and saying, see, I told you so, you're not good enough.
Exactly. And that fear keeps us playing small, disconnected. But here's the key. Vulnerability is the way out. It's about choosing to open up, to risk letting people see the real you, imperfections and all.
Which, honestly, terrifying. This is like walking a tightrope without a net. But you're saying that vulnerability, this thing we're often taught to avoid, is actually the key to living a more wholehearted life. How does that even work?
It's like this. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection, joy, creativity, all those good things. It's through allowing ourselves to be seen, flaws and all, that we truly experience them.
So if we're always striving for this impossible standard of perfection, we're actually blocking ourselves from the very things we want most.
It's like wearing armor to a party, right? Sure, you might feel protected, but you're not going to experience the joy of truly connecting with anyone.
Okay, I could see that. So then that's where Brown's 3 pillars of wholehearted living come in. Courage, compassion, and connection. But let's break those down a bit. I think those can sometimes feel like just, buzzwords.
Right. Absolutely. Let's start with courage. And it's not about being fearless, but rather showing up authentically even when your gut's telling you to run and hide. Think of it as choosing courage over comfort in those moments.
So speaking up even when your voice shakes a little, or saying no to that extra project when you're already swamped.
Yes, exactly. Now, courage without compassion, that's a recipe for burnout. Compassion, it's about extending kindness and understanding, not just to others, but crucially to ourselves, too.
Which, man, this one really resonates. We're often our own worst critics. That inner voice can be brutal.
The worst. And that's why self-compassion is so important. It's about treating ourselves with the same gentleness and understanding we'd offer, like a close friend.
So instead of beating ourselves up over a mistake, it's about saying, hey, everyone messes up sometimes. You're human. It's okay.
Exactly. And that self-compassion, it creates the space for authentic connection, which is that third pillar. We can only truly connect with others when we're willing to be seen as our authentic, imperfect selves.
So basically dropping the act, no more masks, just showing up as we truly are.
Totally. It's like they say, right? Authenticity is a magnet. When we show up as ourselves, we attract people who vibe with the real us.
It's about quality over quantity in those connections, for sure. So we've got these 3 killers, right? Courage, compassion, connection. But how do we actually make this wholehearted living thing happen? Brown gives us these 10 guideposts in the book, and they really do feel like a roadmap.
For sure. And I think the key is remembering these aren't about adding more to your to-do list. It's more like a perspective shift, like looking at life through this lens of wholehearted living.
Okay, so no pressure to become some self-help guru overnight. But if our listener could focus on just one of these to start, which one would you say packs the most punch?
Honestly, For me, it's letting go of shame, embracing worthiness. I mean, that's the core wound for so many of us, that feeling of not enough. And Brown's research showed that shame, it festers in secrecy and silence. Shining a light on it, talking about it, that's huge.
It's like when you finally tell someone something you've been holding on to forever, and just by sharing it, suddenly it feels lighter.
Yeah, totally. Shame loses its grip when we bring it out into the open. And then the other side of that coin, embracing our inherent worthiness. And that's not something we earn, not something we achieve. We already have it just by being human.
Yeah, but that's hard to really believe sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Especially if we've been carrying around these negative stories about ourselves for years. How do we actually change that mindset?
Honestly, it takes practice. Start noticing those shame-based thoughts, those I'm not good enough, smart enough, thin enough, and then challenge them. Like, what's the evidence? What are your strengths? Remind yourself of your wins, even the small ones.
Like making a mental highlight reel to counteract all the negative self-talk.
Exactly. And this ties into another guidepost, cultivating a resilient spirit. Life's going to throw curveballs, right? Resilience isn't about being invincible. It's about learning to roll with those punches, bouncing back from setbacks.
And that takes courage, right? The courage to get back up even when you feel totally knocked down.
100%. It's about accepting imperfection, knowing that setbacks, even failures, they're inevitable. And they're part of the process. You learn from them.
So we're not aiming for this impossible standard of perfection, but for resilience, for that ability to adapt and grow from everything we go through. What are some of the other guideposts our listener could start exploring?
Well, there's cultivating authenticity, which we've touched on a bit. It's really about figuring out your values, what matters to you, and then living in line with them, even when it means going against the grain.
Having the guts to be your own messy, unique self, even if it makes some people squirm.
Yes, and that authenticity makes it easier to set boundaries, which is another guidepost Brown talks about. Learning to say no without the guilt trip, putting your well-being first, honoring your own limits.
Which, let's be real, is so hard for so many of us. Especially, and I'm just going to say it, women. We're raced to be pleasers, right? Put everyone else's needs before our own.
And that's where that self-compassion muscle comes in again. Saying no to something doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone with limits. Which, newsflash, we all have.
So we're talking about being courageous, compassionate, authentic.
Yeah.
Where does joy fit into all of this? It's in the title of the book, after all.
Oh, such a good point. Cultivating joy and gratitude is huge for Brown. It's
Yeah.
about savoring the good stuff, really noticing those little beautiful moments throughout the day, focusing on what we're grateful for.
Like actively looking for things to appreciate, those little sparks of joy that we often miss when we're caught up in the daily grind.
Exactly. And this ties into cultivating play and rest. Brown's a big advocate for making time for things that light us up, that help us recharge, whether that's reading, getting out in nature, or just taking a long bath, whatever works.
Giving ourselves permission to unplug, de-stress, reconnect with that playful part of ourselves.
Yes. And honestly, that's something I think so many of us struggle with, especially now with this whole always-on culture. But rest, it's not a reward for being productive, it's essential.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Shame, worthiness, resilience, authenticity, joy. It's a lot to process.
It is, yeah. But the good news is you don't have to tackle all of Brown's guideposts at once.
It's a journey, not a race.
Exactly. It's like pick one or two that really speak to you and start there. Small steps, keep at it. That's where the magic happens.
Instead of getting overwhelmed by the whole shebang, just focus on one doable thing. Like today, I'm going to challenge one negative thought.
Yeah.
Boom. Positive affirmation.
Yes. And tomorrow, maybe you say no to something without writing a whole novel about why. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
It's like we're rewiring those old patterns, building those healthier habits.
Totally. And don't forget, you don't have to do this alone. Brown talks about cultivating intuition and trusting faith. And that looks different for everyone, right? Maybe it's a spiritual practice or being out in nature or just listening to that quiet voice inside.
Finding that thing that grounds you, that sense of connection to something bigger.
Exactly. That feeling of belonging, of being part of something bigger. That's where the good stuff is, Makes life feel meaningful.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the gifts of imperfection, what's the most important thing our listeners should take away from all of this?
You are worthy of love and belonging, just as you are. Full stop. Embrace the quirks, practice that self-compassion, and have the guts to show up as your true self. That's what it's all about.
And for our listener who's already on this journey of, growth and self-discovery, Brown's work gives us not just inspiration, but those practical tools to navigate this whole human being thing.
Yeah,
Because it's messy and beautiful, and yeah, sometimes it's a lot.
absolutely. It's like, hey, we're all in this together. We're all just looking for connection, for meaning, for a little more joy along the way.
So to our listener, keep going on this path, be kind to yourself, embrace those imperfections, and never forget how worthy you are.
Beautifully said. Until next time.